Today, we are talking about end grain and how to flatten it without causing disasters. We'll go over why these bits are bad, and I'll tell you why I have this piece of pine glued to my walnut. So typically, when you run a piece of wood through either a planer or a jointer or a flattening machine, what have you, the wood grain is parallel like this, and as the tooth cuts over it, it just slices it, and there's not a whole lot of stress on the grains themselves because they are parallel with the direction of the cutting surface. When you stand them up on end, like this cutting board here is, your wood grains are perpendicular to the cutting surface. And when your cutting tool comes in, it will grab them and pull it apart like that. And we don't like that. So how do we mitigate the tear out, blowout, what have you, that we don't want to happen when we have to flatten in grains such as this? I've got a few things I'm going to show you right now. Okay, tip number one is adding a very slight chamfer to the edge of your board. It does not have to be big at all. I think this is probably, I don't know, maybe not even an eighth of an inch here. So just very slight. And at any rate, this board is going to get around over as a finish anyways. So this has absolutely no effect on the finished quality of the board. So why does this help? Well, your cutting tool is going to be coming all the way across here, and the last part of the surface it contacts is behind the edge, so it doesn't have any risk of blowing out those fibers on the very end. So that's step. My second tip may seem a little far-fetched, but stick with me here. It is using a flattening tool. And I realize not everyone has the space to have a massive flattening machine in their shop, nor do they have the ability to weld something together like I've done here. However, there are plenty of pre-made, ready to be sold flattening jigs that they sell now that you can buy online. Just Google it. Plenty of them will come up. It seems like everyone and their brother has one now. The second thing you can do is make one. Before this, I've made one out of angle iron from big box stores. I've made them out of wood before. So really, the world is your oyster, and you can build whatever you want to build to get the job done at the end of the day. Now, why is this so important? Well, it is critical because if you're trying to flatten the board, you need to make sure that the tool that you're flattening with is held at a constant elevation and isn't prone to elevation changes or rocking or whatever. You want it to be a perfectly flat surface, so you need a tool to hold it perfectly flat while it cuts. Seems to speak for itself, but sometimes you got to say it. Now, there's one more thing that I want to cover on these flattening tools because I think it's also important. And I've been doing this for a few years now, and I've learned the hard way and finally figured it out. And it very much matters the tool you use on your whatever your machine is. I've got a router here. Most people are going to use routers. The cheap flattening spoil boards that you see on Amazon that have fixed blades are just that. They're cheap. They're going to be frustrating. I do not recommend you spend the money on those. Why do I say that? Well, hear me out. I am a consummate cheap ass. I am going to spend as little as I can possibly spend to get by on a product or a project. Now, what that led me to was I started on the very cheap spoil bits first that had the fixed blades that weren't changeable at all, and they last for a little while. Then you got to throw it away. Well, then you think, well, I'm not ready to throw this away yet, or I don't have time to wait for a new one. You end up burning the board, and it causes yourself more work. So then I graduated to this type of bit, which is still a cheap overseas flattening bit, but it has actual carbide inserts that are indexable, and you get 4 cutting surfaces on it. This worked for a little while as well, and it did okay.
Enter the Slab Slayer from RIP Precision Tools. You'll notice that this still has 4 cutting teeth on it that are also indexable, but they are mounted on a point versus flat, and it gives you a progressive cutting edge with a lot less metal in contact with your workpiece, which gives you a lot less chance to burn, which they still will if you let it get dull enough, but you can always just rotate it to the next point and you're off and running again. I feel like I should point out that I'm not sponsored by them in any way. I just really like this tool and it's done a fantastic job for me over the last couple of years. So with the chamfered edges and the sharp, correct cutting tool, I have all but mitigated blowout on my end grain cutting boards when they're flattened.
So you've made it this far in the video, but you can't be bothered to build a flattening machine, nor can you afford to lose any material off the edges from chamfering. What can you do? Well, that's where our handy piece of scrap pine comes in. Before I go any further in the video, I want to caveat this by saying it is extremely dangerous to run anything ingrained through a planer. I'm going to say that again. It is extremely dangerous to run anything ingrained through a planer. Now that we've got that out of the way, I'm going to show you how to do it. And one more thing, if you're still watching at this point in the video, hit that thumbs up button. It helps me. It's free for you.
So currently the infeed table is low enough that the wood would not be pulled into the machine by the infeed wheels. As I slowly put the wood into the machine, I crank the table up so that the infeed wheels barely grab the workpiece and start to draw it through, but not so much that it's removing material. Once I figure out that height, I will turn the wheel maybe another quarter of a crank so that an extremely light pass is made through the planer and a very, very small amount of material is removed. And from there, I will repeat that same process until I reach the desired thickness.
So how did we fare? Well, overall, pretty good. You can see in the middle where the pine butted up against the walnut perfectly, there is absolutely no tear out. You'll see down here there was a little bit of tear out, and that's because these two boards were not perfectly flush when I glued them together. There's a small gap about the width of a fingernail here, and just that small gap allowed that much damage to occur. So overall, I think if you're in a pinch, I'm going to stick by my guns and say I would probably not run ingrain through a planer unless I absolutely had to. And if I did have to, this is the way I would do it. But I'll caveat that by saying absolutely have to have everything completely flush when doing that. So to summarize today's video, I want to bring home 4 points. Number one, chamfer your edges if you're able to. Number two, use sharp, good tools. And I put the emphasis on sharp because a sharp tool cuts much better and is less likely to burn your wood. Number three, very small, light passes. Do not try to take as much off as you can in one pass. Make several very, very light passes. And number four, if you must go through the planer, then use your spoil board, but the same thing applies. Very, very small, light passes. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.